The rain hammered the empty street. The lights made the puddles shine. The cameras waited for a perfect moment. The scene was simple, a goodbye under rain, yet the air felt heavier than the clouds above. Sandra stood at her mark, soaked coat on her shoulders, eyes steady, voice steady, heart not steady at all. The crew whispered quietly. The director watched closely, and Keanu stayed near the shadows, calm as a steady shore. The first take began with a soft cue. Then the rain machine roared to life. Sandra walked across the wet ground, lifted her face, and spoke lines about loss and courage. Her words were clear, her timing perfect, her expression deep with feeling. The director watched the monitor and nodded. Yet something stayed missing, something hidden and heavy that the camera could not catch. Cut was called, and the crew reset the scene with fast hands and quiet feet. The second take looked stronger. The rain seemed honest. The light seemed kinder. Sandra did the scene again with control and grace. She delivered each line with care, like someone carrying a glass of water across a shaking bridge. The director leaned forward, unsure and hopeful. He whispered to the assistant that the performance was excellent, but the heart of the scene still felt locked behind a door. The third take began, and a tremble finally reached her voice. It came like a bird landing on a window, soft but impossible to ignore. The camera found her eyes and stayed there, and the crew felt the shift like wind turning in a dark field. Sandra kept moving, kept speaking, kept breathing, but the emotion now was real and raw. When the director called cut, she did not look up. She lowered her head, then walked away without a word. The rain machine stopped, yet outside the studio walls the real storm kept falling. The empty hallway smelled like wood and old paint, and her wet shoes made soft sounds on the floor. Sandra sat on a bench and held her hands together, as if she could hold the night still. Breath by breath, she tried to gather herself, yet the past kept crowding in, quiet and sharp and merciless. Keanu found the hallway without asking, moving with a steady step and simple care. He did not speak at first. He did not reach for words he had not earned. He sat near her but left space for air, for trust, for choice. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the building, soft as a drum under a blanket. The emergency lights hummed, and the world felt smaller and human. Sandra lifted her face and tried to smile, then let it fall. She said that she thought she was fine, that she thought work would carry her through the wave. She said that the wave had arrived anyway, right in the center of the shot, with the rain falling and the lens open and the world watching. She said she felt weak for letting grief break her rhythm. The words came out smooth and honest, like rain sliding from a leaf. Keanu listened with full attention, steady and present, like a lighthouse that does not blink. He said that strength does not mean silence, and it does not mean hard walls. He said that strength often means letting the storm pass through the body, then standing again when it is over. He said that the heart is not a machine on a schedule, and it does not care about call sheets or morning calls. He said that she was allowed to feel this pain and still be strong. She breathed slower and stared at the floor, watching a small puddle grow at her feet. She told him a memory that had followed her for days, about a dear friend who had passed away. She said she had not gone to say goodbye because the thought turned her lungs to stone. She had kept working instead, hoping motion would cancel sorrow. The motion had failed, and sorrow had found her under the fake rain and the harsh lights. Keanu nodded once, and his eyes softened. He said that love does not need an audience to exist. He said that love does not expire when we miss a ceremony. He said that love sits on a chair nearby and waits with patience, because love is patient by nature. He said that her friend would know who she is in her quiet hours, not only in her public ones. The hallway grew warmer with those words, as if the power grid reached in and turned up the heat. A gust rattled a window and the lights flickered, not in panic, but in a passing way. Sandra reached for the towel he carried and wiped her face, small and careful. She said that she feared disappointing people, that she carried an old habit of holding the world on her shoulders. He answered that the world had many shoulders, and tonight it could rest on his for a while. He said this softly, not as a promise he could not keep, but as a simple present choice. She smiled a little, not for the camera, but for her lungs. The smile did not perform. It breathed. She stood slowly, then sat back down, then stood again. Grief behaves like that, moving in loops and soft circles. Keanu stayed patient, followed no strict plan, and offered no grand speech. He asked if she wanted water, she said later. He asked if she wanted quiet, she said yes. So they kept quiet together. Two friends, no audience, no show. Back on the set, the director told the crew to hold a little longer. He said that timing is part of storytelling and hearts keep their own clocks. Some crew members checked their phones, some sipped coffee, some cleaned lenses with slow hands. The rain outside slowed for a moment, then gathered again, like a choir catching breath. The city beyond the stage kept moving, cars making rivers along the gutters, windows drawing lines of gold. Sandra said that she wished she could be strong without breaking. Keanu said that glass looks whole but weak under pressure. He said that clay looks humble, yet holds shape after fire. He said that she was clay, not glass, and the fire was doing its work. The image landed softly in her mind and took a seat. She did not feel fixed, yet she felt understood. And being understood is a form of rest. A production assistant stepped into the hallway and froze, respectful and careful. He asked from a distance if they should push the schedule. Keanu said that they should push a little, and the assistant nodded and vanished like a whisper. Sandra breathed deeper, shoulders loosening, fingers opening, face clear of fresh tears. She did not apologize for feeling, and no one asked her to. The space honored the truth, and the truth settled the space. Keanu offered his jacket, and she accepted it. It was warm and carried a simple scent of rain and coffee. She wore it not as a shield, but as a sign that she did not have to hold the cold alone. They walked slowly toward the stage, steps in smooth rhythm, like a song with a soft beat. The hallway lights felt brighter now, though nothing had changed except a weight being shared. When they reached the edge of the set, the director met them with quiet eyes. He asked if she wanted to try again. No pressure in his tone. Sandra said that she would like to try once more, not to fight the feeling, but to honor it. The crew reset the frame and softened the top light, making the rain look like silk. The camera operator squared the horizon and exhaled. The boom operator relaxed his grip and nodded to himself. The rain machine began again, yet the world felt different. Sandra walked into the scene with no extra armor, only honest breath and steady pace. She spoke of letting go not as defeat but as maturity. She spoke of love that insists on being felt and grace that sits beside it with patience. She held a pause in the right place, then moved on, and the camera fell in love with the truth on her face. The director watched the monitor and said nothing at first. Then he said, "Cut," and the word sounded like a blessing, not a command. The crew stood in calm silence, then clapped once, not loud, just sincere. Sandra bowed her head for a moment, then lifted it with clear eyes. She looked toward the edge of the set where Keanu stood with hands in his pockets, still and present. She nodded to him, and he nodded back, a small exchange of respect that meant more than speeches. They wrapped the scene for the night, and people moved with a gentle energy. Cables were coiled like sleeping snakes, lamps cooled with soft clicks, and the floor team squeegeed water toward the drains. Sandra and Keanu stepped outside the soundstage doors for a breath. The city rain had softened to a fine mist, almost like a secret agreement between sky and street. The air felt clean, the night felt kind, and the wind carried the scent of wet asphalt and eucalyptus. Sandra said that she thought the rain inside her had slowed. Keanu said that rain always stops, even when it feels endless. He said that the sky never forgets how to clear. She looked up and watched a gap open in the cloud cover, a small window of quiet stars over the city. She placed a hand over her chest and counted a slow rhythm, not to measure time, but to honor presence. Gratitude rose in her like steam from warm pavement. They walked back in to sign the nightly reports, and the director thanked them with real warmth. No one spoke about heroics, no one made a scene about the scene. People simply respected the work and the humanity inside the work. Sandra kept the jacket a little longer, then returned it with a gentle smile. Keanu accepted it with the same quiet grace. Professional, human, equal, kind. Before leaving, she told the director that she wanted to continue the next day. She said that she felt ready to carry the rest of the story with care. He said that the story would follow her lead. The assistant called cars, the security team opened the gate, and night workers waved good night with friendly hands. The soundstage doors closed behind them with a soft echo. In the car, Sandra rested her head against the seat and watched the city blur by. She did not think about interviews or headlines or numbers. She thought about clay and fire and love sitting on a chair nearby. She thought about the simple mercy of a friend who makes room for rain. She thought about tomorrow, not with dread, but with a new and quiet courage. Her chest felt lighter, her breath felt deeper, her eyes felt honest. Keanu rode in his own car, a few lengths behind, watching streetlights rise and fall, rise and fall. He did not replay the night for glory or for proof. He let the night be a night, and let the work be the work. He knew that healing moves in small steps, often unseen, often without music. He was grateful to have been present when presence was the only medicine required. The storm would return another day, somewhere else, for someone else. Yet tonight, on a wet street and a simple set, patience had done its quiet job. Respect had held its ground, humility had opened a door, and kindness had carried a share of the weight. The cameras had captured a scene, but the real story lived between two people in a hallway that smelled like paint and rain. The city sighed. The clouds thinned. The heart remembered how to breathe. The morning after the storm, the studio felt quiet and new. Sunlight came through the wide windows, soft and golden. The crew moved slowly, setting up lights and cables, their voices gentle. The smell of coffee filled the air, and for the first time in days, Sandra Bullock arrived early. She wore a simple gray sweater and had no makeup on. The tiredness in her eyes had changed. It was still there, but softer, peaceful, almost calm. Keanu Reeves walked in a few minutes later, holding a notebook and smiling at the crew. He didn't make a big entrance. He never did. When he saw Sandra, he gave her a small nod. She smiled back, and something wordless passed between them. A quiet thank you for the night before. The director watched them from across the room. He had worked with hundreds of actors, but what he saw between them that morning felt different. It wasn't about performance or fame. It was something human, something honest. He whispered to his assistant, "Let's keep the cameras rolling all day. Don't miss anything." Sandra stepped on set for rehearsal. The new scene was lighter, about hope after pain. She took a deep breath and looked around the wet street set they had rebuilt from last night. Puddles still shimmered under bright lights. When the director called action, she began to walk through the rain again, but this time her steps felt different. Her movements were steady, natural, real. She wasn't acting anymore. She was living through it. Keanu entered the scene as part of the storyline, his character offering her an umbrella. As he opened it, real sunlight from the studio skylight hit the umbrella's edge. Everyone on set noticed it. It was unplanned, yet perfect. Sandra looked up, smiling faintly through her tears. The rain machine stopped at that moment, and for a breath of time, the entire studio stood silent. The director didn't yell, "Cut." He just let it happen. The sound of dripping water filled the room, the smell of rain mixing with warm light. Sandra lowered her head and said softly, "Sometimes the rain just wants to rest." It wasn't in the script, but the words were beautiful. Keanu nodded and answered quietly, "Then let it rest." No one moved. It was like time had forgotten to move forward. When the director finally said cut, his voice trembled. The crew clapped again, not for acting, but for truth. Sandra wiped her face, laughing a little. Keanu smiled, proud but humble, as always. The director said, "That's not a scene anymore, that's life." And everyone agreed. During the lunch break, Sandra sat on a folding chair outside the stage, watching the clouds drift across the sky. Keanu joined her, handing her a cup of tea. She thanked him softly. They didn't talk about the scene. They didn't need to. Instead, they spoke about small things. The smell of rain, the silence after storms, the way people heal without realizing it. She told him that something had shifted inside her last night. He said he could see that. She said she had felt broken, but his words made her remember that kindness could still exist in silence. He said, "Sometimes silence says more than anything else." She nodded slowly. The world felt still, like the sky had stopped just to listen. As the afternoon came, the shoot wrapped early. Sandra walked to her car, the sunlight now warm and full. She turned to wave at the crew, and they waved back. Keanu stood near the gate, leaning against a light post, quiet as always. She smiled at him once more before leaving, and he smiled back. There were no big words, no dramatic goodbyes, just peace. That night, when rain began again in the city, Sandra looked out her window and didn't feel sad anymore. She felt thankful. She whispered softly, "Some storms end with kindness." And somewhere across the city, Keanu looked up at the same sky and smiled, as if he heard her. The next day brought calm skies and warm light through the studio windows. The storm had passed, but its silence still lived in the air. Sandra Bullock walked slowly across the soundstage floor, her steps soft, her eyes thoughtful. She had slept only a few hours, yet she felt lighter, as if something inside her had shifted during the night. People greeted her kindly, sensing the change without words. Keanu Reeves was already there, reading his script near the edge of the set. He looked up when she entered, giving her a small smile that spoke more than sentences could. She smiled back, and that single moment carried a quiet comfort. There were no words about the night before, but both remembered it deeply. The director approached with a calm tone, saying they would film the continuation of yesterday's scene. He explained the emotional flow, but Sandra barely needed direction now. The truth of the moment had already written itself inside her. As the crew prepared the lights, she stood beside Keanu and said softly, "I'm ready," he answered. "Then so is everyone." The cameras rolled. In the scene, their characters met again after separation, unsure whether to forgive or walk away. The air on set felt heavy with meaning. When Sandra looked at Keanu, her eyes filled again, but not with pain this time, with warmth. Her voice trembled slightly, real and unforced. When she spoke her line, even the crew stopped breathing for a second. Keanu answered his line gently, almost whispering it. The words weren't in the script exactly as written, but no one cared. He said, "Sometimes the heart doesn't need fixing. It just needs someone to stay while it remembers how to beat." The set fell silent, not because of the acting, but because truth had walked into the room and everyone felt it. The director quietly motioned to the sound team not to cut. The rain machine started again for a final shot, but this time, sunlight broke through the glass roof above. It wasn't planned. Natural light blended with the rain, creating a golden mist that surrounded both of them. Everyone froze, watching something that felt almost sacred. Sandra lifted her face toward the light, her tears mixing with the rain, and whispered, "It finally stopped inside." When the scene ended, the director's voice cracked as he said, "Cut." People clapped softly, but no one spoke much. They all knew something special had happened. The assistant whispered, "Did you see that light?" The cinematographer said, "I didn't plan it. It just happened." After the take, Sandra sat on the curb of the fake street, quietly catching her breath. Keanu walked over and handed her a water bottle. She thanked him and said, "That didn't feel like a scene." He smiled and said, "It wasn't. It was a moment." She looked at him for a long second and said, "You make moments feel safe." He said, "You make them real." As the day ended, the crew packed up in silence. No loud jokes, no music, just soft respect. Sandra stood by the door, looking once more at the set. It looked smaller now, or maybe she had grown bigger inside. Keanu came up beside her, his hands in his pockets. She asked quietly, "Do you ever feel like something changes you forever and you only realize it later?" He nodded and said, "Every time kindness wins." When she left that night, the rain returned outside, soft and thin like a memory. But inside her, it stayed calm. She turned on the car's wipers and whispered to herself, "Maybe this time it won't come back." And far behind her, on the studio roof, the last drop of rain rolled off into the gutter and disappeared. Days passed, and the story they were filming moved closer to its final act. The city had changed from gray to gold as the sky cleared for the first time in weeks. Inside the studio, there was a quiet rhythm now, one that came from peace rather than pressure. Sandra Bullock arrived early again, smiling at the makeup crew, greeting everyone by name. There was still a gentle sadness in her eyes, but it had turned into something deeper, something steady. Keanu Reeves reached the set soon after, dressed simply, his calm presence grounding the morning like sunlight through a window. When he walked in, the sound team stopped their chatter and nodded in respect. Everyone felt it by now. His quiet kindness had changed the whole energy of the set. Sandra saw him and said softly, "You always bring calm with you." He smiled. "I just try not to disturb what's already healing." The director gathered them near the monitors to explain the day's scene. It was the emotional climax of the film, the final rain sequence where both characters would find peace after long struggle. The crew prepared for the biggest setup yet, with high rain machines and strong wind effects. But even with all that, something about the moment felt personal, not cinematic. When the cameras rolled, Sandra stood in the center of the fake street, rain pouring again from above. She looked straight at Keanu, her expression raw and open. He stepped toward her slowly, the sound of water echoing around them. His lines came out with quiet power. "You don't have to hold everything alone anymore," he said. "You've done enough. Let the world carry you now." The words hit her like truth, not dialogue. She forgot the crew, forgot the camera, forgot the lights. Tears came freely, not from pain but release. As she cried, something strange happened again. The thunder sound system failed for a second and the studio fell into real silence. Through the skylight, a soft white light broke through the clouds outside, shining right over them. No one moved. The director whispered, "Keep rolling." The rain machine still ran, but the water sparkled golden instead of gray. Keanu reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. He didn't say his next line because he didn't need to. He just said, "It's over." And in that silence, everyone believed it. When the director finally called cut, Sandra couldn't stop smiling through her tears. The entire crew stood still, not clapping this time, just watching with quiet respect. One of the camera operators wiped his eyes and said softly, "I've never seen anything like that." The sound engineer replied, "That wasn't acting. That was life catching its breath." Sandra turned to Keanu and whispered, "How do you always know what to say?" He said, "I don't. I just listen." She looked down and nodded, her voice barely audible. "You listen better than anyone I've ever met." He smiled, but said nothing more. Silence again filled the air, but now it felt like peace, not emptiness. Later that evening, the director called them both into the editing room. He wanted to show them the footage of that last take. As the scene played, they noticed something shocking. Right at the moment, Keanu said, "It's over." The rain on camera visibly slowed, and a faint sunbeam crossed the frame, even though there was no natural light source near that angle. The editor paused the video and said, "It looks like the rain listened to him." Everyone stared at the screen in disbelief. Sandra whispered, "How did that happen?" The director smiled gently. "Some moments don't need answers," he said. Keanu looked at her and said softly, "Maybe the rain inside you stopped." And the world noticed. She didn't reply, but her eyes filled again, not with pain this time, but gratitude. That night, as she left the studio, she stood under the real sky for a while. Clouds drifted apart and the stars appeared one by one. She thought about all the storms she had faced, fame, grief, loss, and loneliness, and how sometimes healing didn't come from grand speeches or big moments. It came from someone sitting quietly beside you when words ran out, as the cool breeze touched her face. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." She didn't know if she was speaking to Keanu, to the sky, or to the night itself, but she knew that something had shifted forever. The rain might come again someday, but it would never drown her light again. The final week of filming began quietly, almost too quietly. The crew moved through the studio like they were walking through a dream. The big storm scenes were finished, and everyone felt the strange calm that comes after something powerful has already happened. Sandra Bullock arrived with a small smile that reached her eyes this time. She greeted every crew member with warmth, thanking them for their patience and hard work. She looked stronger now, like someone who had walked through the storm and found her way home. Keanu Reeves stood near the lights, checking a few notes with the camera operator. His calm presence was the same as always, gentle and grounded. When Sandra walked up to him, he looked up and said, "You look rested." She smiled. "For the first time in months, I actually am." He nodded. "That's good. Storms end when they're meant to." The director called them together to rehearse the final scene, a conversation between their characters after everything had ended. There was no rain, no thunder, just soft light and silence. It was a quiet ending, but everyone knew it carried more power than any action shot could. As Sandra sat across from Keanu at a small wooden table in the center of the set, the world seemed to shrink to just two people sharing air and understanding. The camera started rolling. Keanu's voice was low and warm as he said, "You don't owe the world your strength every day. It's allowed to rest." Sandra looked at him, her eyes filled with peace instead of pain. She replied softly, "Then maybe the world can rest with me." The crew didn't move, didn't blink, afraid to disturb the moment. It felt like time had slowed to honor the truth in her words. When the director said cut, there was a silence so deep it felt sacred. Then, one by one, the crew began to clap, not out of habit but out of gratitude. Sandra stood and smiled through tears she didn't try to hide. Keanu gave her a small bow and she returned it. The director said quietly, "That's not just the end of the film. That's the end of something else too, something we all felt." Later that evening, as the set lights dimmed and everyone packed up, Sandra stayed behind for a few minutes. She walked to the middle of the empty street set where she had once broken down, where the rain had once fallen hardest. The air was dry now, the floor warm from the studio lamps. She closed her eyes and listened. No thunder, no crying, just stillness. She whispered to herself, "It really stopped." She turned and saw Keanu standing at the edge of the set, watching quietly. He walked toward her, hands in his pockets. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" he said. She nodded. "It does. It feels alive again." Keanu looked up at the stage lights and smiled. Maybe because the storm left space for the sun. She looked at him with gentle eyes and said, "Thank you, Keanu. Not for the words, but for the silence you gave me when I needed it." He shook his head and said, "You already had the strength. You just needed quiet to hear it." As they walked out together, the studio lights faded one by one, leaving only a soft glow at the doorway. Sandra paused for a second before stepping outside. She looked back once more, seeing the street set glisten faintly, as if it remembered every tear and every drop of rain that had fallen there. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you for helping me find my light again." That night at home, she opened her window to the soft wind. The city lights sparkled below like small stars. It began to drizzle lightly, but she didn't close the window. Instead, she stood there, letting a few drops touch her face. They didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt like blessings. She smiled to herself and said quietly, "Some rain doesn't hurt. It heals." And somewhere across the city, Keanu stood on his balcony, feeling the same gentle rain, and smiled too. The premiere night came faster than anyone expected. The film was finished, edited, and ready for the world. Banners hung across the theater front, lights flashed from cameras, and reporters filled the air with noise and excitement. People waited eagerly for Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves to arrive, their names glowing on the marquee like stars reborn. Sandra stepped out of the car first, calm but emotional. She wore a simple black gown that caught the light like quiet water. The crowd cheered, calling her name, but she moved slowly, greeting people with soft smiles. She looked peaceful, as if she carried something precious inside her. Not fame, but understanding. A few seconds later, Keanu arrived. He waved briefly, smiled at the fans, and then walked over to stand beside her. The cameras flashed again, brighter this time, not just for glamour, but for warmth. They shared a small glance that said everything words could not. Inside the theater, the lights dimmed and the movie began. Everyone watched the screen in silence as the story unfolded. When the rain scene came, the real one, the night Sandra had broken down and Keanu had comforted her, the audience felt the emotion deeply. Many didn't know what had truly happened that night, but the energy on the screen felt different, almost alive. When the part came where Keanu said, "It's over," people wiped their eyes quietly. Even the strongest ones could not pretend it was just a film. As the credits rolled, the theater stayed silent for a few seconds. Then applause filled the air, rising like a wave. Sandra covered her face for a moment, overwhelmed. Keanu reached over, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. She turned to him and whispered, "You stopped the rain inside me that night." He smiled softly and said, "No, you listened when it stopped." She laughed through tears, shaking her head. "You'll never take credit, will you?" He replied, "There's no credit in kindness. There's only peace." After the premiere, they walked outside together. The city sky was clear. No storm in sight, but the streets were still wet from rain earlier in the evening. The lights reflected on the puddles like tiny mirrors. Reporters called their names again, but they didn't rush. Sandra paused near the curb and looked up at the sky. "Do you think it was a coincidence that night?" she asked quietly. Keanu looked up too and said, "Maybe not. Maybe the sky just wanted to show that hearts and weather share the same rhythm." The next morning, news channels called the film a masterpiece of emotion and truth. Critics spoke about the rain scene as if it had magic in it. They wrote that it felt too real to be acted. What they didn't know was that it was real, captured by accident, born from pain, healed by kindness. The footage still existed, but only the director and the two of them knew what truly happened. 1 week later, the director called Keanu and said, "People keep asking for the raw clip. They want to see that moment." Keanu answered quietly, "Delete it." The director hesitated. "Are you sure?" Keanu said, "Some kindness belongs only to the moment it was given." And so, the moment disappeared from film forever, living only in memory. Sandra later said in an interview, "The most powerful scene I ever did was one the world will never see, because it wasn't acting. It was grace." The reporter asked what she meant by grace. She smiled and said, "A friend's words once stopped the rain inside me." Years later, on another movie set, the sky turned gray again, and rain began to fall. A young actor beside Sandra looked nervous, shivering in the cold. Sandra placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Don't fear the rain. Sometimes it comes to remind you that healing still exists." He nodded, unsure of her meaning, but smiled anyway. She looked up at the sky and whispered so quietly that no one could hear, "Thank you, Keanu." In the distance, thunder rolled once, then faded gently away, as if bowing in respect. That night, Sandra sat by her window at home, watching another light rain fall across the city. She thought about all the people she had met, all the storms she had faced, and all the kindnesses that had carried her through. Her reflection in the glass looked peaceful. She whispered to herself, "The rain stopped once, and it never started again." And somewhere out there, in another quiet home, Keanu Reeves looked up from a book and smiled without knowing why, as if he felt her peace through the air. The rain eased outside her window until only silence remained. She closed her eyes, resting her head back with a calm smile, and whispered her final thought before sleep. Some storms don't end with thunder. They end with kindness.